It was past midnight in Midtown Manhattan. The streets were still on fire. Game 4 of the 2026 NBA Finals had ended hours earlier, a game so absurd, so historically impossible, that even people who watched it struggled to describe what they saw. The San Antonio Spurs had built a 29-point lead, the largest halftime advantage in NBA Finals history, a lead so enormous that broadcasters were running out of ways to describe how dominant San Antonio had been. And then, in the fourth quarter, in front of 20,000 screaming Knicks fans at Madison Square Garden, it collapsed, possession by possession, point by point, until OG Anunoby hit a near buzzer beater that sent the building into the kind of delirium that New York City had not experienced in decades. The Knicks were up 3-1, one game away from ending 53 years of suffering. And outside the Spurs hotel in Midtown Manhattan, thousands of fans who had been celebrating in the streets for hours were waiting. They were not there to shake hands. Victor Wembanyama stepped off the team bus that night and walked into something that no professional athlete should ever have to face. Objects flying through the air, laser pointers aimed directly at his face. A crowd of hundreds pressed against the barriers, screaming at him from inches away. And then, caught on video, confirmed by multiple angles, seen by millions of people within hours, an egg hit him directly on the head. He did not stop, he did not react, he kept walking. And right there, in that moment on a Manhattan sidewalk at midnight, a story began that revealed something about this city, about this rivalry, and about Victor Wembanyama himself, that nobody saw coming when these finals started. This is that story. Let's go back to the beginning of this series. Because to understand how a 7'4" superstar ended up walking through a hail of flying objects on a New York City street, you have to understand what built the pressure that made that moment possible. This was not a normal finals. This was not two teams playing basketball and shaking hands after every game and conducting themselves like professionals in every direction. From the very first tip-off in San Antonio, this series had an edge to it. A personal animosity between the two sides that was real and unscripted and grew more intense with every passing game. It started with Victor Wembanyama. Before Game 1 even tipped off, cameras caught Wembanyama standing with his arms crossed during the playing of the American national anthem. The image spread across social media within minutes. Knicks fans, already primed for battle after a 13-game playoff winning streak and the belief that this was finally their year, latched onto it immediately. Some defended him, noting that he is French and that the gesture may have carried no intent whatsoever. Others saw it as the opening act of a villain story that they were ready to write for him. Then Game 1. The Spurs built a 14-point lead. The Knicks came back. Brunson took over. Knicks won by a single possession. The Garden celebrated like it was already a championship. Game 2 in San Antonio. Another double-digit Spurs lead. Another Knicks comeback. Another Brunson takeover. Another single-possession Knicks victory. The pattern was being established, but nobody knew it yet. It still felt like coincidence rather than destiny. Then came Game 3, back in New York, Madison Square Garden, at maximum volume. President Donald Trump in attendance, which brought Secret Service, security perimeters, and the cancellation of the planned watch party outside the arena. Thousands of fans who had been planning to watch the game outside the Garden were redirected to Bryant Park, 7 blocks away. The Spurs won Game 3. Wembanyama shoved Brunson in the fourth quarter, a foul the officials missed in real time, one the league later said should have been called. But the Spurs won. The Knicks' 13-game playoff winning streak was over, and the streets of New York lost their minds. Not in the way a city loses its mind after a victory, in the way it loses its mind after a loss. Approximately 7,000 people had gathered at the Bryant Park watch party. Most of them were there to have a good time. Passion, energy, drums, dancing, Hare Krishnas in Knicks gear, fans streaming the game on laptops balanced on fire hydrants. But when the final buzzer sounded and the Spurs celebrated on the Garden floor, something in a core, that crowd shifted. Fans flooded out of Bryant Park and onto 42nd Street. They surrounded cars. They jumped on top of them. They hit windshields with lightsabers and other objects. Someone ripped a bus stop sign out of the ground and swung it at people in the crowd. Glass beer bottles were hurled at police officers. Trees were pulled from their root beds. Massive planters were overturned. A group climbed onto an NYPD squad car while the crowd below cheered and kicked at the vehicle. NYPD at it. Officers arrived in riot gear, helmets, batons, the strategic response group, and pushed the crowd back toward Fifth Avenue, while fans taunted them, took selfies, and live-streamed the chaos as it unfolded around them. One person climbed on top of a large planter and pulled out a live snake. At least 4 officers suffered injuries. 8 people were charged. 13 others received criminal summonses. A 39-year-old man wearing a Spurs jersey was walking down West 47th Street, 15 blocks from the arena, when he was surrounded, stomped, and punched by people trying to rip the jersey off his body. 21 people were taken into custody that night. The police union was incensed. PBA President Patrick Hendry said publicly that officers should not have to endure a barrage of mayhem after every single game, that elected leaders needed to send a stronger message and make it clear that this behavior would not be tolerated. The city responded with statements. Mayor Zohran Mamdani said that while New Yorkers are passionate about the Knicks, the fights and assaults on police officers were unacceptable and would not be tolerated. City Council member Justin Sanchez said the city needed to debrief, reassess, and plan better for the next game. One night later, Game 4 made everything from Game 3 look like a rehearsal. But first, the game itself. Because what happened inside Madison Square Garden that Wednesday night is inseparable from everything that happened outside it. The Spurs came out possessed. If Game 3 had been competitive, Game 4 was a humiliation in the making. San Antonio built a lead with such clinical efficiency that the Knicks seemed to have no answer for any of it. By halftime, the Spurs led 76-49, a 27-point halftime lead. The largest halftime deficit in NBA Finals history for the home team. The Garden, which had been electric at tip-off, went quiet in a way that 20,000 people going quiet all at once sounds like air being removed from an enormous room. The Knicks cut it to 15 entering the fourth quarter, still an almost impossible deficit to overcome with a single quarter remaining. And then something happened that will be discussed in basketball circles for decades. The Knicks went on a run, not a normal run, not the kind of run that gets a comeback started and then fizzles, a run that built and refused to stop. Brunson found his rhythm. Anunoby started hitting shots. The crowd, which had been silent, began to find its voice again, and then louder, and then deafening. Point by point, the lead that had been 29 points disappeared, and with 3.7 seconds remaining, OG Anunoby hit a shot that sent the building into the kind of noise that registers on physical measuring equipment. Knicks win. Largest comeback in NBA Finals history. Series lead 3-1. Outside Madison Square Garden, the celebration began almost before the buzzer sounded. As many as 10,000 fans flooded the streets north of the Garden between 5th and 8th Avenues. Fireworks went off in dense crowds. Traffic came to a complete standstill. People climbed scaffolding and light poles. Someone tried to flip a taxi. A 17-year-old boy was shot once in the left foot at 43rd Street and Broadway. And because crowds had completely taken over 42nd Street and an ambulance could not physically reach the scene, he had to be transported to the hospital in a police car. School buses that had been used to shuttle people to World Cup matches nearby were set on fire. People with bats struck the buses, jumped on top of them, and rocked them back and forth while they burned. 4 people were slashed or stabbed. 10 NYPD officers were injured. One struck in the head with a glass bottle. Another punched directly in the face. 56 people were taken into custody. And meanwhile, a few blocks away, the Spurs were boarding their team bus to return to their hotel. The crowd that greeted them numbered in the Dio hundreds. These were not the same fans who were celebrating in Times Square. These were people who had positioned themselves specifically outside the Spurs hotel in Midtown Manhattan. They knew where the team was staying. They had been waiting. The video begins with what looks almost like a standard scene. Fans lining the barriers on both sides of the hotel entrance, phones raised, recording the players getting off the bus, heckling, chanting, obscenities. The kind of thing that happens in New York whenever a visiting team comes to town in a high-stakes series. And then Victor Wembanyama stepped off the bus. The first projectile was thrown immediately. He did not react. He kept walking. His back was to the crowd, and he did not know it was coming. The second one hit. On a separate angle of the video, which also showed laser pointers being aimed directly at the group, you could see the object shatter against a street pole that was inches away from Wembanyama's body. Another angle confirmed what the ESPN Australia account later posted with the video. An egg hit him on the head. His head moved slightly. Members of the team staff rushed to get him through the hotel entrance. He kept walking. He did not turn around. He did not react. He went inside. A few seconds later, one account of the incident says he did briefly confront a person standing near the hotel entrance before continuing inside. That confrontation lasted moments. He walked away. The NYPD reported 15 arrests in connection with the hotel incident. An additional 41 people received criminal court summonses. No arrests had been made specifically in connection with the objects thrown at Wembanyama as of early Thursday morning, the New York Post reported. Running total across Game 3 and Game 4, 77 people arrested or summoned, 10 officers injured, a teenager shot in Times Square, 4 people stabbed or slashed, school buses burned, and an NBA superstar hit with an egg on a Manhattan sidewalk while his security rushed him through a hotel door. Now let's talk about what happened the next day. Wembanyama was asked about the incident at Friday's press availability, and what he said, and more importantly the way he said it, changed the conversation again. He said he did not really think much of it, that he had seen one video of the eggs and had not seen the others, and then he said something that landed differently than anyone expected. He said it was okay. He said it obviously was not good at all, but he said it did not bother him. It does not bother me. Those 4 words, delivered by a 22-year-old who had just survived one of the more genuinely threatening public moments any athlete has faced during a championship series in modern sports history, did something specific. They reframed who Wembanyama was in that moment. Not the villain, not the sore loser who had been accumulating flagrant fouls and skipping media availabilities. The man who walked through flying objects in Midtown Manhattan and came to the press conference the next day and said it did not bother him. He also addressed the broader issue of fan behavior. He said that we cannot forget it is a game, that they are just playing a game out there, that he is all for passion. But that, with respect for each other, what happened was unacceptable. That was measured. That was thoughtful. That was, genuinely, the most composed and dignified Wembanyama had sounded at any point in the entire series. But the story was not finished, because there was another hotel incident, one that happened earlier in the week, before Game 4, that added a different dimension to everything. A Knicks fan named Phil Godlewski told the New York Post that he had rented one of the 2 penthouse suites at the Ritz-Carlton in New York City, a suite directly adjacent to the one occupied by Wembanyama. He claimed that hotel staff removed him and his family after Wembanyama's security team complained about harassment. The alleged offense, according to Godlewski, was that his son had said good luck to Wembanyama in the hallway. Wembanyama's side denied any such complaint was made. The hotel did not comment. NBA fans split instantly, some calling it a fabricated story, others saying it was believable given the tension of the series, others suggesting it painted a picture of Wembanyama as someone easily rattled by anything connected to Knicks fans, even in a private hotel corridor. The story was never definitively resolved, but it added to the texture of a series that had, at every turn, generated more off-court drama than anyone expected. And then the championship celebrations happened. After Game 5 in San Antonio, after the Knicks won the title and Wembanyama walked off the court, the city of New York erupted in scenes that made Games 3 and 4 look restrained. 63 people were arrested overnight. 10 more officers were injured. A 17-year-old was shot. Buses were set on fire. 4 people were slashed or stabbed. Tens of thousands of people flooded the streets and Times Square and the blocks around Madison Square Garden in what the NYPD called a pattern of incredibly reckless and dangerous behavior. The victory parade was announced for Thursday. Mayor Mamdani gave the Knicks the keys to the city, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, the question that nobody had properly asked started getting louder. What actually happened to the line? Not the handshake line at the end of the game. That conversation had already consumed the sports media for a week. The actual line, the one between passion and violence, between celebration and criminality, between hating a player and throwing objects at him in a dark Manhattan street while he has his back turned. Sports rivalries have always contained hatred. The Celtics and Pistons, the Bulls and Pistons, the Lakers and Celtics, the Spurs and Knicks. Hatred is real, and it is part of what makes the sport genuinely compelling. The feeling that the outcome matters, that the people on those floors have genuine animosity for each other that goes beyond just competing. That is what Draymond Green was talking about when he said this rivalry has the ingredients to define the next decade of the NBA. But there is a difference between hatred on a basketball court and a mob waiting outside a hotel to throw things at a player who just had the worst night of his career. Wembanyama was already inside the building. The game was over. The damage to the Spurs, or whatever you believed the Spurs had done, had already been absorbed. The people throwing objects outside that hotel were not expressing passion about basketball. They were targeting a specific individual in a specific place at a specific time when he could not defend himself, when his back was turned, when he was trying to get through a door. That is not fandom. That is something else. And the NBA said almost nothing about it. No statement from the league office specifically addressing what happened at the hotel. No public commentary from the commissioner. No acknowledgement that one of the sport's most important young players had been physically targeted by a crowd of people on a public street in the middle of a championship series. The silence was noted. Michelle Beadle, the sports broadcaster, took a pointed shot at the Knicks fan base in the aftermath of the hotel incident. The discourse around whether Knicks fans had crossed a line became its own news cycle, separate from the game results, separate from the handshake controversy, sitting alongside everything else as another data point in a series that had generated more controversy per game than any in recent memory. Now, here is what makes this story genuinely complex. Victor Wembanyama was not entirely an innocent bystander in the building of this animosity. He was not a player who had conducted himself in a way that discouraged the villain narrative. The anthem, controversy, the flagrant fouls on Brunson, the elbow on Towns, the laugh at Robinson on the bench, the foot in Brunson's landing zone, the walk-off, the press conference claim of domination. Every single one of those moments added fuel to something that was already burning. New York City took all of that fuel and did something that was genuinely dangerous with it. That is 2 different things existing simultaneously, and both being true. Wembanyama played his role in building the hatred, and the people who threw objects at him on a Manhattan sidewalk crossed a line that nothing he did on a basketball court could ever justify crossing. The most interesting part of this entire story is not the throwing of the eggs, it is what Wembanyama did with it. He walked through it. He kept his head down and kept moving and got through the door. He did not make a statement, he did not perform outrage, he did not give anyone the reaction they were looking for. And the next day, in front of reporters, he said it did not bother him. Whether that was genuine or calculated does not matter. The effect was the same. He took the ugliest moment of a series full of ugly moments, and he absorbed it with more composure than he had shown during any of the ugly moments he had created himself. That contradiction is what makes Victor Wembanyama such a compelling story heading into next season, because here is where we are now. The Knicks are champions. Brunson is Finals MVP. New York waited 53 years for this, and they have it. The parade happened. The trophies are displayed. The season is over. And Victor Wembanyama is sitting somewhere in San Antonio with an off-season that is going to be defined entirely by the question of what he does next. He held a press conference after the series and said something that, if he means it, is exactly the right thing to say. He said he was pissed off about the fact that it was probably going to be 100 games before the Spurs could get back to the finals. He said he did not know how to say it in English, but he was going to have to hold all of this inside of him and execute for 100 games. 100 games of holding this inside. That is a competitor talking. That is not someone who is going to spend the off-season making statements and doing media and processing defeat publicly. That is someone who is going to bury everything that happened in the dark and bring it out every single time he takes the court next season. The 2026 NBA Finals created one of the most genuinely compelling storylines the league has produced in years. Not because of the Knicks winning, not even because of how they won, though the comebacks were historically remarkable, but because of what was built in the space between the games. The hatred is real. The rivalry is real. The animosity between Wembanyama and the city of New York is real. When these two teams meet next season, and they will meet because the league now has a vested interest in making sure they meet, the memory of a midnight hotel entrance in Midtown Manhattan, and a flying egg, and a 22-year-old who kept walking without looking back, will be in every building they play in. Wembanyama said it does not bother him. Jalen Brunson, who stood on that court with a championship trophy while Wembanyama disappeared into a tunnel, said the way he was raised tells him to show respect, win or lose. The New York fans who threw those objects said something else. They said this is all personal now. And the NBA, whether it wants this story or not, has it. The question heading into next season is not whether the Knicks and Spurs will be back in the finals. The question is whether Victor Wembanyama uses everything that happened in June 2026, the losses, the blown leads, the hotel, the egg, the walk-off, all of it, and turns it into something that the entire league has to reckon with. History says that the greatest players do not respond to this kind of humiliation with words. They respond with championships. New York is waiting. So is the rest of the world.